We are live.
Okay. Yeah, we are back. So committee, we have Kelly Murphy and Ted Gates with us. Come on up. So bring one of the comfortable chairs. It's more comfortable than other ones.
Yeah.
And we've been finding you. We're looking at Bill 220. We've been, it's based on your per pupil cost, it caps spending increases based either on your per pupil cost or your overall ed spend. And then there's an appeals if something strange happens. But we didn't have the proposed new budget numbers for this year. We were told they were due on Sunday. I'm sure they all came in on Sunday. So we're just wondering, you know, what were the numbers for this year? What are you seeing? Of course, we won't know what the final numbers are until the votes happen. Most of them will be town meeting, but there's outliers. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it. So as mentioned, Kelly Murphy, Education Finance Director, and I got Ted Gates here with us, our Senior Fiscal Analyst. And I don't know, I'm happy to share my screen, but what I was planning to do is just kind of run through the memo that's available on the committee's page. Is it helpful to share a screen or it's?
Yes, it's
Okay.
helpful. And then if anyone is watching at home, they can see
Great.
it.
Let me just see if I can flip the link here then. Bear with me. So as you can imagine, let's see here. We do have a lot of the budgets in, so that's the positive piece. We're at about right where we were last year at this time, but there are still a few stragglers. So it is sort of a cautioned kind of preliminary review for today. We are still.
Kelly, you say we're about where we were last year this time. What does that mean?
Number of districts.
Number of
Districts that are reported.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and so I'll go over that too in the just the talking today.
It's about 90%.
Okay. Talking about the rate of growth or,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying. Really appreciate that.
Although
Thanks for your patience with me while I get to sharing here.
On that same point, since it's about the same number reported as of now since last year, is there a common characteristic of these stragglers? Are they usually the smaller districts, the larger districts, other common?
I'm not sure, honestly. So I did take a look at, so the few that are out right now were in last year this time
Okay.
and they're good size. So I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to it. I mean, I could certainly look back if you'd like me to see if like there's a, common thread.
There's a few districts that don't have their town meetings until May, so those districts, we probably don't have those numbers yet.
That's right. They don't have to post theirs.
Yeah, so this is preliminary, although you'll see as we kind of get through the memo here, we do a lot of the budgets in. We've got 100 submissions at this point that have been sort of.
Pull that up a little.
I absolutely
It
can.
might be a little easier to stay. Read.
How's that?
That's great.
Okay, perfect. That's like right now. So just as you mentioned, the deadline for the submission and reflection was on the 15th. And so that was Sunday, followed by a holiday. So we still have a few that we're looking to get in. We also are scrubbing the details a little bit. For instance, there was one district that is the same as last year, exactly the same. And while that may be the case, it might not be accurate. So I just want to make sure that the information that we have is, what was intended. So we're going to review that, but for comparison's sake, last year this time when we pulled these numbers, we were at 105 districts. We're at 100 right now, and there are a few stragglers that have come in since yesterday. And so we're at about 103 right now. So it's pretty close. So I think we'll get a few more of them. And as Ted mentioned, there's about, I think, 8 or 9 districts that have different town meeting dates. But I haven't done this cross-reference the ones that are not in to see if, those are the districts that have not responded. So I will do that as we kind of look through sort of the final analysis here, as we're sort of developing the sheets for the yield bill. I'm happy to also note, which is not noted here, we do have long-term weighted ADM numbers in, and they've been booked in the forecast. So that's a piece that will certainly go into this. But back to the budgets. So as we were talking about, 100 responses are in. I do want to mention on this first bullet that it's specific to the budgeted expenditures, offsetting revenues, and education spending. We did request additional detail this year to try to get sort of more of the line items so that we could take a closer look at the cost drivers. But really, we're not seeing a response rate yet with that. It's still a little early. So some are submitting all their details, some are not. And so it's just very variable. So we have these factors, and you'll see in the tables how we pulled those in. So it's 84% response rate. I will also note, you'll see in the tables that we compared to the December 1st letter, and we had an 80% response rate in that collection. So we're kind of on par there. Out of the budget submitted, we compared here, I did just mention that we do have the 27 long-term weighted ADM, but when we started building kind of the review of the budget, we were just comparing to what the universe was in the prior year. So we're at about, 88%, almost 90% on both the weighted ADM and the education spending in. And then in terms of just kind of like a bottom line, best estimate at this point, the average increase of the budgets that I've submitted is 4.3%. And so it's not quite as much as we were projecting back in December. But I will say that's still preliminary because there are a few stragglers that I really would like to kind of get into the number just to kind of see that looks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Historically, is this first go around fairly accurate when you actually end up fleshing out all of the numbers at the end, or?
As I understand it, it is a little bit variable because there may be adjustments, whether a budget gets voted down, or there may be additional adjustments to the offsetting revenues. So this is a good estimate for this time, but it could change.
I would guess it wouldn't change too much though.
But do we know by how much, or it sounds like no, you don't have those.
That's a good question. It would be nice to know. What I can say that is pretty close is the long-term weighted ADM not coming in right about where I thought it would. Something, yes. So in this first table, we just sort of captured, all the details. It was just total and aggregate of what was submitted. So again, to get a sense of what those budgets were looking like, and that's where we got sort of the education spending 4.3% up. You'll notice that budgeted expenditures are up by 3.5%, and then offsetting revenues are actually down by 0.9%. And our previous iteration, this percentage was a little bit higher. So we did ask some of the districts why that was. And so they were using some of their fund balance to offset revenues from prior years that is no longer available. And so then you can see that there's a decline in the revenue piece there. So that's what we've got here in this table. We can talk through some of the details of changes.
So one of the big questions I have, and I'm meeting with a school district budget manager tomorrow morning to just ask a specific example, but can you reflect on offsetting revenues volatility? The S220 construct we have right now is based on education spending. But my concern is I don't know, I understand what generally goes into the offsetting revenue, but if that fluctuates so much as education spending reflects the property tax impact, I think that the districts have a lot more control over their total budget expenditures. But what could you tell me about offsetting revenues fluctuations from year to year for districts?
So I want to get back to you on that for sure. And, it can also say that, we have been looking at what districts have on their bottom line in the year. So what they might have as a fund balance or unassigned fund balance, just to kind of get a gauge on like what might be available. And while there is variability year over year, they need that liquidity to be able to manage their budgets. And so I don't know that I really have a good answer for you in terms of the volatility, but in that offsetting revenue, that could be anything from sort of prior year, carry forward. It could be federal revenues, I would want to take a look at sort of what's in there.
So ESSER funds, when they were on, if a district used ESSER funds, that would count as offsetting revenue, correct? And if they didn't have that the next year, all of a sudden their education spend jumped, which we saw that in many cases.
Except that ESSER funds were supposed to be treated as a
One-
one
Yeah,
time,
right.
and that's where the problem came in.
We could look into the offsetting revenue too, and do that.
I would love to know, in general, what do we see volatility and fluctuations?
I guess I wouldn't say that federal funds are offsetting revenues. I mean, they are usually given to school districts for a specific purpose, Title I, Title II. Those are for specific types of students that need extra supports, whether they're EL students or students with low income students. There's also federal special education funds. So they're not offsetting the budget. Those are meant to be for a specific expense for the education of those students. I mean, I think the only sort of quote unquote true offsetting revenues could be if there are some gifts to school districts, but those are pretty small and far and few between and limited. And then there can be fund balances, as was mentioned, and school districts use those either to lower their property tax rate by offsetting some of their expenses. So that's what I mean by true offsetting, or they use them to put into designated funds for specific expenses, whether it's capital expenses or specific educational expenses. So I wouldn't even consider, those are usually reserved for specific expenses. So it's usually just the unreserved funds that are truly offsetting funds. Most everything else is for a specific purpose.
Agreed. Yeah, and I'm just curious how much from year to year does that fluctuate? Do those revenues that are counted in an accounting context as offsetting revenues? Is there great volatility from year to year in most districts?
Yeah, I think it depends on the district. I think
Yeah.
there are like generally accepted accounting principles for the percentage of those kinds of revenues that you should have in your school budget for any budget, just like a business, and so there are school districts that hold on to reserve in order to be, fiscally responsible, and they're not doing it because they are, for nefarious purposes. It's for
Ours don't fluctuate much.
On the tax sheet that every school district fills out and presents to their voters, offsetting union revenues are categorical grants, donations, tuition, surplus, federal, et cetera. So it's everything.
Or tuition too, from like.
It'd be tuition, yeah, it's everything that's not education spending that's in your budget.
If I may, so for districts that receive tuition kids, I'm just trying to better understand if we use the education spend, which is just for this offsetting, do tuition dollars fluctuate a lot? But what I'm hearing from you and in Burlington, you don't see a lot of fluctuation with offsetting revenues. It's relatively easy to keep that moderated. But there was a blip. Would we agree that there was a blip over the last couple of years?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. And I think tuition revenue depends on circumstances and the location of. They're in a place where there's a lot of non-operating schools and they're getting a lot of tuition, and that their revenue may change because of inflow or outflow of students. But if you're in a district that's not.
One thing of like Colchester, South Burlington, we get a lot of Grand Isle kids, Georgia Fairfax kids. So those are tuition kids. Like, and I'm just wondering, I'm gonna ask my budget manager, is that pretty variable? And so I just want to get a better handle on that. If we're gonna use, if this goes forward, if education spending is using, I want to know the volatility drivers.
You don't have that as a school by school breakup yet.
No, we do have it, we do have some of that detail though.
The offsetting revenue piece.
Yeah.
We have it by district.
By district, yeah,
Right.
okay. That's how we were looking at past revenues, so that would be helpful.
We can certainly make sure we get you, yeah. So just, you can see here, then moving on to table 2, in the highlighted line, we, are projecting, what we anticipate the education spending would be if everyone was grown by 4.3%. So the remaining districts, we just grew up from FY 26. And so that's what you can see here and see the differences, between the December 1st projection and this current projection.
Okay.
I know it's premature, but we can say that good news for the Vermont taxpayers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely, 85 million, 85.5, more than.
It's favorable. And I do, like, again, it's preliminary, but it's a good sort of, it's the best that we know right now. And as we get more detail, we will update this number as it comes in. We do anticipate that, this will come into greater focus when we do the next collection after town meeting. So this is representative of the board voted budgets and likely what will be warned. And then from there, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, because this is back to more historic spending growth. Problem is, it's building on top of that record-setting 18% and then 12%. And so it's a much higher base than it used to be, which means that property taxes are much higher than they were pre-COVID. So the question, yeah, how do we shape out that bump?
I love the standard deviation of this 4.3% for the reported districts, and also to compare that to last year with a 2-year comparison in prior years. I'm anticipating, but I'd love to prove this out, that we're seeing a less variation as we move away from the ESSER cliffs. But if you give me that spreadsheet, I can do my stuff.
I would still wonder how far back in time, if ever, we could go to find an increase in education spending that was equal to or less than the rate of inflation. So in many ways, that's what we're really looking at. And we're kidding ourselves if we say, hey, we're doing a great job because it's 4-point-something% when the rate of inflation is 2.7%. So we get further and further behind every year.
There's also wage growth in there too.
Well, theoretically, wage growth is in the inflation rate.
And we cover more things.
Here's healthcare costs.
Yeah, there are different types of inflation rates,
I know.
and education spending is generally a different inflation rate.
Well,
because
if
of
you
the
use
factors that go into it.
the education spending
It's not a
inflation rate,
basket of
Well,
goods.
we've got the
how would we
NIPA rate.
be in comparison to that now?
The NIPA rate was what, 3.4, Julie?
Uh,
That was
I
the
think it was.
around 3, I think it was 2.8, that's right.
2.8, okay.
It's not, well, that's not far different from the rate
Very
of
different.
inflation generally.
Decimal point dust. So we are still above the end spend.
And you project that
Right.
10 years, how big a gap will there be if we continue at these rates?
Well, I think that's what we're seeing is we're down, even if it is twice inflation or not quite, we're down to historic growth levels. But we're halfway up the mountain when we start to level out, and the taxpayers haven't made it up that cliff yet. Yeah, I think that's what we're dealing with. No matter what caused the cliff. We haven't gone back anywhere near pre-COVID spending. And I don't know if we know why. Are we doing it?
Well, that's why I asked the question is I don't know that in recorded memory, we have matched the inflation rate or lower than the inflation rate on the increase in education spending in a year.
Yeah.
And as we look at saying, well, we blame this on COVID or we blame it on lightning, it still is a trend. And I bet if we go back and we match those numbers over a period of time, that education spending will still increase, has been increasing at a rate higher.
Oh, yeah.
And that leads us to say, well, where are we going to be 10 years from now? Unless we do something differently than what we are doing and have been doing.
And the other thing, I'll look to Julia for correction, is that we got a major influx of funds when we did sales tax. Because that was, well, it was as equal as you can get to what the general fund transfer was. But we, then we picked up the online sales, and there was millions, tens of millions, 20 is, it was a lot of money that showed up during COVID or just prior to COVID that wasn't going in. So these increases, you know, the increases in the tax rates, there's also been a major revenue influx in there.
And to Senator Brock's point, you have to acknowledge the other thing that's percolated in every one of these discussions is healthcare. It's out of control. Yeah, out of control strong. It is incredibly expensive here in Vermont, and that is a cost driver. So if you take inflation and what they're also spending on covering.
But at the same time, wages. Wage growth in education has increased faster than the rate of inflation, significantly faster, as it has in state government.
I think the other thing we need to remember is the cost of healthcare for the taxpayers has also increased, which, yeah, I mean, these are all pressures.
But in addition to wage growth, you've had an increase, even though the student population is decreasing, the number of employees in the system are still increasing. So if you compound the number of FTE employees increasing with wage growth, then you get an even higher bump.
And all those employees, not just teachers, are in the healthcare system. So despite declining population, we are still increasing personnel. And I've been told we are losing teachers.
Teachers are going down, but everybody else.
But
besides
everybody
teachers
else is going up,
Yeah.
so we're replacing teachers with somebody.
I think that indicates that we're actually shifting responsibility for those costs onto schools. And so as we're declining number of teachers because we have a declining number of students, but the students who are remaining are higher need students, and their services are being provided to them in schools and being put on a school budget. And so I think it's also important to acknowledge that some of the things that we're calling education costs are actually mental health and social service costs that are now the responsibility of the schools. And we're also talking about, all these security costs now and all of the, requiring schools to protect kids from, ICE invasions and things like that. So, I mean, there are so many things that we're putting on schools that they have to do. And you mentioned the influx of those sales tax revenue that happened in 1 year and then became part of the education fund and didn't happen again. So as the balance between the sales tax revenue and the property tax revenue leveled out, then the property tax level increased because sales tax had sort of leveled out as part of the fund.
So one piece of analysis that needs to be done along those same lines is, we start comparing Vermont's spending and Vermont's costs to other states. Every state does a little bit differently, and what's in their spending formula is very often different. And the real analysis that I've never seen done, maybe someone else has, is one that balances and equalizes the type of revenue and the revenue source for each state, so that you don't have a whole bunch of things that Vermont pays for out of its education budget, but somebody else pays for out of its human services budget, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't have comparison, frankly, that are valid.
And maybe I wonder if NCSL has something like that. Or reward.
I've not seen it. I'd love to see it.
I mean, I think the revenue side is easy to do a comparison. It's the expense side.
Yeah,
How
it's expensive.
how expenses are covered in school budgets. And as far as I know, that kind of analysis is really difficult to do because of how you count things.
We're still learning, getting our schools all on the same. budget.
Chart of accounts.
Yeah.
Chart of accounts. And I wouldn't be surprised if some other states have the same issue. So, okay. Yes.
This is great. Really appreciate this. Looking for this. On the charter of accounts, or that, I think you referenced that you're expecting some more granular data that you don't quite have all now. In that, will you be, so something Senator Gulick said, reporting on reserves that each district holds? And then this is a broader conversation about Act 73 and where it goes forward, but I'm just curious, if districts start consolidating, do those reserves all of a sudden get pooled with the larger districts? And then if a district gets more money than they want to spend, do they, in that new foundation formula construct, are they going to be able to just create reserves? I'm interested in more reserves reporting as to what is in the reserves of different school districts out there and what restrictions that there are, because I don't think they can just put anything in reserve. They have to ask the voters to approve certain. Okay. If there's reports out there that I should know about, I'm interested to understand more about what's being held in reserves.
One thing I'm interested in understanding is, and it's happening more and more frequently now, as people are catching up to the excess spending threshold, is how districts this year behave that are above, at, or below the excess spending threshold. I think I had a number of districts in my area where it was an exercise to get down to it. I'm really interested to understand how that plays out over 119 school
I think
districts.
even back in December, January, there was only 6 or 7 districts that were anticipated they might be hitting excess threshold, and they were working to bring it down, so they would have hit it.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a chance to look how many are really right now, actually.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, I had, at least I had 3 or 4 in my area that were never flirted with that ever in the past. And this year they're flirting with it.
I'll take a look and see what
Okay.
we're seeing with the budgets coming in. And then Senator Shinde, just in terms of the review of the reserves, so we do collect that data. And we also do, get each of the districts audits. And so we do look at kind of their unassigned fund balance and sort of what that might look like in terms of, what they could potentially put into reserve. And so we do have a supplemental worksheet, which is part of our collection at the end of the year, that we do collect data on the reserves that districts have. But I'm sure you can imagine that there's a little bit of variability in how districts are capturing those reserves and how they're assigning them. But we're happy to provide that detail as well.
And additionally, I think the AOE is getting 4 new positions as part of Act 73, and one of those positions at least is going to be working with districts on how to consolidate bank accounts, including reserves, probably how they pull those things together, and what the rules are around that. So as when we hire somebody to do that work, I think we'll have a lot of information about it.
So I don't know how familiar you are with S220 and the construct that we're contemplating, the allowable spending growth caps based on education spending. But would you say that if districts out there, if this were to move forward and it was in effect in that fiscal years 28 and 29, and districts that have reserves for differing reasons, they're saving up for high school or whatever the purposes are, those are relatively restricted, or can the boards in general use those reserves if they had to in order to just meet that cap? Would this force them, and that would they be able to drop? Not that we want them to do that, because that's not necessarily good practice, but what can you tell me about general reserves fungibility in times of constricted spending to be used for offsetting revenues?
I wish that I had a good answer, but it is variable between districts and, again, what they're using those reserves for. I mean, some of them have committed, their funds, for example. So when you look at their audit, you'll see that they've got, it's a larger district and they have 2.4 million on the bottom line, but they've reserved 14 million for programmatic expenses. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing is happening. And so you could, they could change that if they wanted to, but so the districts are using their funding.
To change that, if it was a voter approved capital reserve fund, do the school boards have the capability of doing so without holding a vote in your experience?
I don't think that's the way the statute is. So there is pretty specific rules around, what you can do with your reserves. There's either, drops to the bottom line as sort of a fund balance. It could be reserved for a specific purpose, which you need to go to the voters, or there's the construction piece, which, then you would reserve it in that way.
It seems like if you had to get voter approval to put it into a capital reserve, you probably need voter approval to take that out.
If you but I suspect just pictures.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, and if you can get those school by school, what you got to us, we'll. Or
Just for clarification, on sort of the offsetting revenue piece, do you want, how many years would you like? Would you like it?
Oh, I don't know, but you want offsetting revenue? No, we're looking for per pupil spending.
Oh, yep.
Wait, no, but Senator Chittenden, you had a
Yeah.
specific request.
Offsetting revenue variabilities. So
And by that, you mean reserve fund variabilities.
that too, so those are the two threads of what I said, sorry. So offsetting revenue, one piece of question I have is I want to compare this year's offsetting revenues used by districts and that volatility to the last 3 or 4 years. And then even if you had it before the pandemic and the federal funds that came from heaven, I'm trying to understand the beds. I'm trying to understand how much volatility there is in the offsetting revenues before I feel comfortable using the education spend as the cap, as opposed to using a total unbudgeted spend, which is the point you raised early on in this discussion.
Well, I mean, the way that it's modeled right now is my understanding, and Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's education spend per pupil, like the long-term weighted average versus total education spending. But it's still education spending, so it does not include federal, it doesn't include reserves, it doesn't include, gifts and special funds. It only includes the narrow, I mean, it's broad, but it's narrowed education spending. It does not include total spending.
Right.
So if you wanted to include total spending, that's a different number altogether.
That's what I'm toying with, to understand if offsetting revenue makes education spending a much more volatile from year to year. I feel like these spending caps could be even more unnecessary.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't. I don't think it would be fair to include, for example, federal revenues in any kind of spending cap that we would impose. Because school districts, like I said, get those for a specific purpose. And those are usually federally required purposes. So if we put a cap on them, include them, and say you can't grow those above a certain amount, that's really punishing mostly districts with high numbers of low income kids or high numbers of special education or EL kids. And that is problematic in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, offsetting revenues. If your voters have, it's pretty hard when you're looking at getting your budget passed to be sitting on any amount of revenue. You have to get voter approval. Sometimes you've gotten voter, and there was some money sitting around that had been put aside for a track that never got built. So that money's sitting there, but you could use it to offset taxes. You could use it over 3 years to offset taxes. But that's on a school by school. It's not like somebody comes in and endows you with $20 million 1 year, and then nobody endows you for the next 10 years. It's part of your budgeting process, but I don't have a sense that they're swinging tax rates that way. I mean, but if you're going to talk,
To Senator Hardy's point, that's why I want to understand offsetting revenues more, and I've got some meetings this week, because if it makes sense to you, federal monies are assigned for kids with certain needs. I completely agree that should be part of it, but are there things in there that should be necessarily considered? Because if they do have greater volatility,
Like
tuitioning, if the offsetting revenue,
oh, like tuition revenue?
Yeah.
I mean,
does that swing a lot? I don't know.
yeah, I think it depends on the district and where it is.
In the budget collection process, we collect the three numbers: total expenditures, local revenues, or offsetting revenues, however you call it, and then the difference between those two is education spending. So we do collect all three of those numbers by, they're required to warn those numbers, so we collect those. So that's the offsetting,
Okay,
that's
and
the
that's
offsetting
something you
revenue that
could
you
give
can
us.
use for your.
For the volatility.
It
You don't have-
probably wouldn't lay out what, if this was money that got put aside to fix the roof and then you can fix it. But it would tell you the offsetting revenue and how volatile it was.
You don't have that local revenues more granular, it's just one bucket.
Not really, yeah.
But that wouldn't be ed revenues.
Those would be the offsetting.
That wouldn't be federal revenue coming in.
If they, to the extent that they include any federal revenues in their total expenditure budget,
Yeah,
then yes, those would be they would be considered offsetting revenues.
okay.
It depends on, what your purpose is, how you define offsetting. In,
Yeah.
in the numbers that we collect, offsetting is anything besides money that comes from that spending thing.
So we get into if there's a big swing in your population, if ICE comes in and removes half of your English language students, then yeah, you're gonna get less money for them next year.
Well, that's on the per pupil side, which I think we adjusted for with that backstop. But what I don't think that's what I'm struggling with is on the volatility of the offsetting revenues. If there's components of that is similar to the backstop on the small districts that are affected by it. I just don't know enough about school budget broadly. If they are susceptible to great swings in offsetting revenue, that would make this allowable spending growth cap.
Yeah, we probably need them to have business managers.
Talking one tomorrow morning, but
Well, we probably need that one school.
yeah.
If we want to see that, we probably should have business managers, represented business managers talk to us. Okay. Any other questions for the witnesses? Thank you.
Can we send you emails with questions?
Of course.
Yes. Maybe you should send them through the communications team, might be a better idea.
I think they're all not got that.
whether they can answer you.
Okay, committee, we'll try and get the managers, yeah, we'll try and get other people in tomorrow. Okay, Julia's gonna let us know what update on the Ed Fund tomorrow, right, with the latest numbers that we have as best as we can do it. We're gonna get, we hope, an update from the league on property tax delinquencies, and are they seeing any uptick there? And then we have Senator Gulick's literacy programs in the BAA, and what that money is going for. And maybe we will ask them if they're ready, if they could talk to us about the school assessment or report card. I'm not sure what they're calling it. I think it's this individual school assessment in general, what they found. I don't know what to tell you on Friday. I'm gonna be watching the weather. I'm not, I will cancel. I will stay. I did that the day we got 34 inches because the league stayed and it was league day.
Other if we did a Zoom, if you would let us go home.
That's
Zoom it.
true, yeah.
I don't know that I guess I can let you, yeah, but that means I have to stay. No, we will, we've got 2 Zoom folks. But we will just play it by ear. There's nothing. The early college experience, it is the McClure Foundation. They're here for the day on Friday, so I will stay to hear from the students.
Well said.
But, yeah, I
I
mean.
have to drive
we'll-
over the mountain,
if
so I
it's-
may not.
Well, yeah, where the snow is starting and when, I don't know. But, and what part of the state it's hitting, I don't know, but I will try and get you out.
We could all change between now and Friday.
It looks like it's hitting more in this, so where I'm going is
Yes.
Oh.
Middlebury's getting hit more than Montpelier up here.
Oh, yeah.
So I will probably
There are
not
a
stay.
couple, yeah, there are a couple that are hit southern part of the state. They don't know how far north the line is going. So we will play it by ear. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are we going to do the S220 numbers with 2027 numbers
That's what yes, that's what we just asked to get laid out.
tomorrow?
Whenever they get it to
Oh,
us.
okay,
That's what this was about.
That's something key that I want to see.
right. I know. Okay, so like next week or do we not know?
It is on for Friday
Oh, for this Friday, got it.
with a possible vote.
Oh, wow, okay.
That will be.
Wait, the S220 is on for Friday as a possible vote?
Yeah, it was on for last Friday for a possible vote.
Well,
There it is.
if we have a snowstorm and I have the.
Oh, yeah,
stay,
no, I don't
I
know.
would really appreciate not having.
No, I'm not doing a vote with people not here. If I were going to do that, I would have done it last week when everybody left for a press conference. And
Right.
left four of us here.
That's
I
right. Sorry
don't
about
play
that.
those games
We
yet.
apologize.
I got caught.
Me and Lola.
I asked if anyone would like to make a motion to pass 220. So far, we are an honorable committee. Okay, that's it for today.